So Deuteronomy. Christians, I think a lot of us don't see obedience as something that we think about on a daily basis. We don't wake up and say to ourselves, okay, my eyes are open today. I'm going to make sure that I do the things that God would ask me to do, and I'm going to make sure that I think the things that God would want me to think. I think that generally speaking, we assume obedience is happening. So we go to church most Sundays, of course. We don't steal. We're not killing. We're faithful to our spouse. We don't usually use harsh or foul language. And so on the surface, we probably look obedient in comparison, maybe even righteous. But what about those smaller, subtler things that are much more part of our day-to-day life? For example, the anger that flares up before we've had our morning coffee. The pride that we excuse as obedience or wisdom or just part of our job. The gossip that we justify as concern. The self-centeredness behind so many daily decisions. The fear that turns into anxiety and then control of everything around us. Most of the time we shrug and we say, well, yeah, but that's just human. It's not ideal, but it's not terrible. I could be doing worse. I know I shouldn't. I know what God wants, but I don't think God really cares. I'm a human after all. Humans screw up. So here's the problem. These moments that we shrug off probably reveal that we haven't fully understood the connection between love and obedience and love. So today we're going to wrap up the Torah portion of our 66 endeavor, which means that we need to turn to the book of Deuteronomy. And my hope today is that we will see how love for God is not just big, visible, emotive actions, but love for God is actually a posture of devotion that shapes every thought and every word and every choice in every relationship, day by day, and in fact, generation by generation. So before we move into our teaching text for this morning, I'm going to do what I've done in all the previous messages in this endeavor. I'm going to give you some background on Deuteronomy. So what's going on in Deuteronomy is, if you remember looking at the book of Numbers, the generation that had been delivered from Egypt, God gave them what they wanted. So they complained and said, we'd rather just die and things like that. And then God eventually said, okay, it'll be as you've asked. And so the generation dies in the desert. And then the second generation has made it to basically the river, stone's throw away from the promised land. And this is where we were hanging out in our Numbers sermon, where Balaam was trying to curse them and he couldn't. They're hanging out there. And so that's where we pick up. They're still there. They're on the verge of the promised land. It is almost move-in day. And Moses now needs to fill in the next generation on the things that the first generation knew, but failed to, we could say, believe. And so he basically reviews the whole thing with them. I'm going to tell you what it means to be Israel. So he starts to unpack this. Deuteronomy actually means second law. And it's not because he was giving a new law, it was because he was giving the law the second time. This isn't Sinai, this is now at the river, and he's got to tell this group the same thing. He's not saying to them, just simply repeat God's commands, but I need you to renew your heart. And I need you to remember the faithfulness of God that has been with Israel, but will also be with you as you go into this new land. So at its core, Deuteronomy is a book that calls God's people to love and to serve and to obey God wholeheartedly, which we find in the central text, which I don't think I have a slide for. Do I? I do. Good. Deuteronomy 10, 12 to 13. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to observe the Lord's commands and decrees that I am giving you today for your own good. The structure of this book is 4 major movements. It's actually a series of speeches. So chapter 1 to 4, Moses is just telling them the history. He reviews Israel's journey. He reminds them of God's guidance, his discipline, and his faithfulness. And then chapters 5 all the way through 28 are this covenant instruction. He explains the meaning and the purpose of God's laws, both the moral laws, the ceremonial laws, and the civil laws, which will shape how Israel is to live as God's unique people in the land that he's giving to them. Chapter 29 to 30 is the covenant renewal. But there's also some prophetic warning that Moses begins to give them, sort of a caution with the renewal. So people are urged to reaffirm their commitment with promises of God's blessing. But there's also warnings of consequence. And then Moses says this great famous line where he says, I've placed before you life and death, blessing and curses. Choose life. Chapter 31 and 34 is the transition of leadership. Moses delivers his last words as Israel's leader, and he hands the reins over to Joshua and prepares Israel now for life beyond his participation, presence, and leadership. So the purpose of this book, that we probably don't read all that often, is to remind the next generation of God's covenant and their calling, to prepare Israel spiritually and morally to enter and live in the promise of God, and to highlight God's faithfulness across not just theirs, but all generations. If we were to put the book in 3 words, we'd say it's love, remember, and remain. Love God fully, remember his faithfulness, and remain loyal in that covenant obedience. In the book in a sentence, remember God's faithfulness, renew your covenant love, and walk in wholehearted obedience. This morning's teaching text is going to come from Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 9. Some of you will likely know this as a familiar passage. Begins with this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. So verse 4 of this is what's known as the Shema. It's the central prayer of Judaism. The name Shema comes from the first word here, which is hear. It's the prayer of hearing, the prayer of listening. And for faithful Jews, this prayer is spoken every morning and every evening because they want it to shape how they think and then how they live. What I like about this is far more than a prayer or even like a belief statement. This verse 4 kicks off a call to devotion, to love God completely and to remember him in the ordinary rhythms of your life. And I'm sure some of you know, but when Jesus was asked by some religious fanatics, what's the greatest commandment? He said it was this. This is what he gave them. Showing that loving God with everything we are stands at the very center of a faithful life. And so we dive in then and unpack it. We see this, that love begins with who God is. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So now, like many of you, I do almost all of my work on computers. And I've noticed something. The amount of to-do items that I'm juggling usually correlates to how many tabs or windows I have open. During busy weeks, I have more tabs open than I can keep track of. If you had seen my computer at Christmas time, like honestly, like 40 tabs all going at the same time. Yeah. Because I'm an artist. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but when I have that many going, I tend to not do anything well. Because when everything is a priority, nothing gets the attention that it actually deserves. And it got me thinking this week that those tabs on my computer at times look a lot like my life. You know, I tend to, and maybe you do too, live with too many tabs open. You've got your work tab and your kids tab and your retirement tab and your health tab and your friendship tab, your hobbies tab. And somewhere usually off to the side by the trash can is the God tab. And when God's just another tab, he becomes easy to mute and silence. He becomes easy to minimize. You forget to save it before closing. And it's not because we reject them, but because everything else feels more urgent. We may confess one God, but functionally, we live as though there are many. And so long before office work and laptops, Moses knew that Israel was facing the same pressure. Contrary to popular belief, we do not have it harder than they did. They lived among nations with countless competing gods, and compromise was constantly going to be pulling at them. And so he begins, Moses, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Now, I would have liked Moses because this isn't small talk. He's not just making some observations about God. He's saying that this means we have to exclude all rivals. And when you make this claim, it will get a reaction. If you don't believe me, send this out to the entire, wherever you work, send it out to the entire work email list. And just say, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the only God. See what happens. I suspect you'll find that it leads to a reaction. Because it seems today that there is this feeling that if there is one ultimate authority, one ultimate truth, one ultimate God in a pluralistic society, that makes people uncomfortable. It's a fascinating thing of humans that people tend to get very suspicious when something is presented as certain. The brilliant Dallas Willard commented on this some years ago. He said, "We live in a culture that has cultivated the idea that the skeptical person is always smarter than the one who believes. You can almost be as stupid as a cabbage as long as you doubt." Oh, I'm just cautious. I'm just realist. We live in a culture that has cultivated the idea that the skeptical person is smarter. Well, you're just naive. I'm not. I'm cynical. Doubt sounds sophisticated. It sounds reasoned. It sounds measured. Certainty sounds dangerous. It sounds naive. And so saying that God is one, that he's unique, that he's exclusive, well, that's a very certain statement. But if there really is one ultimate God, then that tells us that life is not infinitely customizable to whatever we want it to be. Our opinions don't define truth. We answer to someone. And that's why Moses says to them, "Hear me, listen to me." And by the way, church, when he said hear, that was more than just let it go in your ears. It was now do something about it. To hear was to live it out. Pay attention, listen carefully, because everything that follows depends on getting this right. Moses was not just giving them something to think about and debate, he was giving them a way to live. In a world of spiritual noise, Moses here is anchoring them in clarity. That there's no rival, there's no equal, and there is no substitute. Yahweh alone is God. You know, some scholars, when they come to this verse, they will emphasize the oneness means God's uniqueness. That he alone is the way he is. Others will emphasize his perfect unity within himself, that he's whole and that he is consistent and that he is undivided. And I don't think you need to pick a side. I think it's all right. It's all true. Because together that shows us a God who is perfectly faithful. He is never in pieces or fragmented or devised. He is never unpredictable. And that matters because love, church, and you know this to be true, grows out of what we know. You cannot truly love a person you do not know. In our family, it's a bit of a running joke that my wife, Chantel, sometimes gets Black Forest cake for her birthday. Even though she has said many times she does not like that kind of cake. Yes, I'm a slow learner. People mean well, but the gift misses the mark because it isn't rooted in who she is. It's a love that misses the personal thing about her because we gave her something in love, but it isn't actually true to who she really is. And that same principle applies to God. You cannot love a God that you misunderstand. And so Moses begins the whole thing. Before you go into the promise, we are going to make sure that we know who this God is. Before they are even commanded to love him, they must know the one who they are called to love. They misunderstand him, the devotion will be distorted, and things will not go well. The same is true for us. Pain, disappointment, unanswered prayer can quietly reshape how we see God until we find ourselves trying to relate to a version of him that is not true. If the Lord alone is God, divided loyalty makes absolutely no sense. Love for God then is not a passing feeling that we have. Like, oh, I feel the love for God when they play the right songs at church. Then my affection blooms. It means aligning every part of our life under his authority. And I find, church, after walking for the most part faithfully with Jesus since I was a teenager, that's freeing because it means that I don't have to constantly generate emotional intensity to say I love God. Feelings rise and fall. Energy fades. Troubles come and choke out joy. Jesus told us as much. And so Moses is pointing to something deeper. He's saying there is a steady alignment of priorities and habits and decisions and resources that we need to be giving toward the one who is truly Lord as our expression of affection for him. You see, this kind of love is actually visible. It shows up in ordinary days. It shows up on Thursdays and Sunday nights before you go back to work. It's not just lived, it is lived, not just felt. And when you begin to see God clearly, then love stops feeling abstract. It becomes the natural direction of an entire life. Now, if God then is not just another tab in our life, we could say, we want to say, well, then how do we live? How do you actually do that? And so Moses begins to tell us. And basically what he says is you don't just rearrange the tabs. You have to surrender the entire machine, the whole thing. Heart, soul, and strength. Love for God demands the whole person, not a piece of us. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, not your pastor's heart. Love the Lord your God with all your soul, not your spouse's soul. Love the Lord your God with all your strength, not your best friend's strength. In a world still mostly convinced, that mental assent is the greatest of human achievements, it's easy to treat belief as something that lives mostly in the head. It's ideas we agree with, it's words we say, it's convictions we claim. But maybe belief looks different than that. Dallas Willard, in a different book, offers us an important and I think corrective reminder. We don't believe something by merely saying we believe it, or even when we believe that we believe it. We believe something when we act as if it were true. Oh. We say we believe things, or even we believe things, often, maybe even easily. Do we live as if they were true? And that captures exactly what Israel is to understand. This is the message of Moses here. If the Lord alone is God, if he is unmatched, if he is unique, if he is fully faithful, then recognizing him isn't only an intellectual exercise. Recognizing God demands a whole life response. In the language of the Bible, in the language of Scripture, this response is called love. Love is love. No, love is obedience. Love is commitment. Love is allegiance. Love is not reduced to a fleeting feeling or a Sunday morning sentiment. Love is not like the spiritual scout badges we put on ourselves as we go through life. I served on the worship team. I was an elder. I volunteered at Christian camps. Love is allegiance to God expressed through obedience. Now, this is an important message, I think, for Christians who have been walking with Jesus for a long time. There is a danger in knowing this. And there's a danger that I think we don't talk about enough. You see, if we're not careful, obedience can drift very quickly into pride. Into thinking that because we're right, we're better than everybody else. We could argue that the majority of the crimes the church has committed over the years are because it operated in spiritual pride. We are right. John Ortberg puts it like this: being right is actually a very hard burden to be able to carry gracefully and humbly. That's why nobody likes to sit next to the kid in class who's right all the time. One of the hardest things in the world is to be right and not hurt other people with it. That is painfully true. It's true in terms of obedience to God, the big picture, but it's also just true in terms of how we live in the rhythms of life. If we're the one who thinks that we're the only one who knows how to rightly set the kitchen table, we probably have hurt our kids. If we're the only one who rightly knows when and how the kids go to bed, we've probably hurt our spouse. If we're the only one who knows when it is time to do taxes, or when it is time to mow the lawn, or when it is time to have fun, we may be hurting other people. No, it's not the time for that. That may hurt other people. Because knowing truth, church, does not automatically make us loving. In fact, knowing the truth can make us sharp and dismissive and impatient and unpleasant. And that's why the command here isn't merely be correct about God. It's love God with your heart and your soul and your strength, because if you're going to love him because you know it's right, you're going to need to align yourself, because that's a big burden to carry. This talks to the disconnect between Christian moralism and a genuine Christian life. Because real love for God will always produce humility, not superiority. Well, I know better. That guy, he should. You have to make sure. That type of posture will produce self-congratulation, not worship. And so to love God is to live as though his lordship is real, not just affirm it with thoughts or even words. Moses said, if you want to love God well in the land in front of you with all of its beauty, but all of its challenge, it's going to require your whole person, not just your mind. Your heart, your soul, and your strength. Now, I'm sure you've at some point in your life had the pleasure of sitting under someone's sermon where they went through these exhaustively. So I'm not going to do that, but it is good to touch on them. Just so I can show you how Moses was saying it's the whole person. So your heart, this was thought to be the seat of your thoughts and your understanding. Notice, not your feelings. Loving God with the heart means aligning your thinking with all of his truth. Not him with your truth, you with his. Your soul was the inner self. This is your identity. It's the will, the chair of human will. Deep motivations, values. And so loving God here means orienting who you are at the very core with him. And then your strength, this isn't just your energy. This is all of your capacity. So it's your energy, yes, but it's also your resources. It's also your physical action. And together, when we put this all together, we start to see total devotion. God wasn't asking for occasional compliance, you can see here. He wasn't saying, do it when you can. Do obedience when it feels convenient. He was calling for their life, that they were going to be different from everyone else. He just didn't want declarations, he wanted life. Now, that's all kind of heavy, so let's go into low church for a moment. Let me give you an example. I've been watching a lot of the Olympics, except for this morning, so keep your mouth shut. I won't look. I can't look up. But it's incredible how these athletes completely devote themselves to their sports. They were living like Olympians long before they got to Italy. Now imagine I decided to convince you all that I'm also an Olympian. Specifically, I would choose ski jumper because that seems like a pretty good time. So I put on the skin-tight suit, and I carry the expensive skis, and I start high-fiving people like it's a Juicy Fruit commercial. And I stand at the top of the massive ski jump, and I shout out to you, I'm an Olympian. Watch me Olympic. And the moment I start going, that is absolutely perfect. That's the favor of God. You get the point. No, I had an earlier joke that's not going to land the same because we've lost it now, but I was going to say the truth will come out, but probably before that, probably the moment I put the suit on, the truth came out that he may not be the world's most elite ski jumper.
I'm stuck on the suit now.
You're welcome. But anyways, now as the microphones have helped us understand, probably 3 seconds in, I'm dead. I die. I fully die. And everyone watching knows immediately, I didn't think he was that British ski legend, Eddie the Eagle. He is, after all, just Zach Eagle. A pastor who didn't fit into his suit in the right places. I could declare I was an Olympian all day long. I could be convinced of it. But my actions would reveal I didn't have the training, the discipline, the life, the passion to be an elite ski jumper. And I know that that's silly. We did it on purpose. But there is a point that loving God with our whole selves shows up not just in what we say about it, but how we live it out. It's not about abstract spirituality. That's what I really appreciate about this. This isn't about perfecting yoga poses over a lifetime or knowing all the chants or doing weird diets. Nor is it occasional Christian actions when that's the kind of guy we want to be today. This is living real life in a real place in a way that says, I know who God is, and because of that, I live this way. And then Moses makes this even more practical. He says, love for God has to be cultivated daily. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. We impress a lot of things on our children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. So let me ask you rhetorically, when was the last time something meaningful in your life grew without effort? Healthy relationships don't grow by accident. Character doesn't just form just 'cause. And faith doesn't just appear on its own. You know what does grow without effort? Weeds, mold, bacteria, cancer. And so left alone, things tend not to drift towards health, they drift toward decay. And Moses understood this about the human heart, that love for God will not sustain itself on good intentions. It has to be cultivated and repeated and remembered and woven into everyday life. And that's why right after commanding Israel to love God with their whole being, Moses tells them to put these words on their hearts. Talk about them constantly. Build your lives around remembering who God is and what he does. Covenant love doesn't grow by accident, it grows by intention. The love that will last is the love that is cultivated. These commandments then should be on your heart. As I said, this isn't just your feelings. In the Old Testament, this was the center of your thought and your will. It's this place where the actions flow from. And so God's words are meant to live in Israel's constant awareness. Then it moves outward, which I love. Impress them on your children. That language is actually very colorful. It's vivid because it's like engraving words into stone. Or like leather stamping. Putting something on a document that's going to be permanent. Impress them. Press it in. It's supposed to be placed deeply into the next generation through patient, repeated instruction in a way that will literally leave a mark on them. It's not casual exposure. It was intentional formation. And then notice Moses says, and do it in those rhythms. Do it when you're just sitting at home. Do it when you're walking along the road, when you're lying down, when you're rising up in the morning. In other words, do it in all of your life. It's not just developed in sacred moments. much more it must be in the ordinary ones. Now, it's easy to hear all this and think, okay, well, great, but I've heard this like 100 times before, and I don't really know how. Because Moses is saying love fades when it's neglected, but it grows when it's remembered. It's not emotional intensity, but it's intentional rhythms. But even when I do my best, it seems like I don't get it right. And if we were to stop right now, everybody leaves here feeling fairly terrible. Because none of us can do this. Can we love God fully without failing? Could Israel? And so the answer, and I'm sorry if you are a black and white person, is yes and no. Which leads us directly to Jesus. So we've seen the call then to love God with every tab of our lives. And that's a beautiful vision. But if we're honest, it's a crushing one. Because the story of Israel isn't actually a story of wholehearted love. It's a story of wandering hearts. They promised devotion and they built idols. They sang worship songs of allegiance and then they forgot the one who'd rescued them. And I think that if we look at our own tabs this week, we probably see the same patterns. Our love is divided, our attention wanes. We're very stubborn. The band Mumford & Sons put out a new album, and they have a fantastic lyric in there that says this: "We would rather be ruined than to change." Pastor Brianne reminded me this week that I preached a message here, a year or so ago, and the book was talking about how 70% of leaders don't finish well. Because we would rather be ruined than have to change. And so the command doesn't just inspire us, it actually exposes us. It shows the gap between what God wants and what humans seemingly can actually give. And so what do? We turn to Jesus. The turning point of the entire Bible is where we failed, Jesus did not. Jesus is, church, in case you've not been taught this in evangelical churches, is the true Israel. He's the one who did it. In the wilderness where Israel grumbled, remember Jesus tempted in the wilderness, trusted, did not compromise. Where we compromise, Jesus obeys. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when every ounce of strength was failing, Jesus didn't try to grip harder onto something else he could control. He surrendered. Jesus invited people to do what only he could do, which was live the greatest commandment perfectly. He loved the Father with an undivided heart so that one day through his death and resurrection, his perfection could become yours. Now, going back to Deuteronomy, Moses actually foresaw this need. It's pretty cool. One of the last things Moses is talking about to these people is actually that after all that, I know you're going to fail. He's like, you're going to fail so bad that you're probably going to be exiled. But God is going to be so faithful that he's going to bring you back. He's going to gather you again. And then he goes on to say this. And it's almost a prayerful, prophetic word. The Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul and live. So if we were to ask Moses right here, wait, who is going to do it perfectly? It's going to be a work of grace. It's going to be a work of God, that he will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants so that you may do it. And what's pretty cool is after this, if you go through the Old Testament, and we will do this, all the prophets start to talk about this. That he's going to give you a new heart. He's going to give you a new heart. The prophecies are on the work of God's grace that will give his people new hearts. And then with that promise hanging in the balance, Jesus comes to us and he does that for us. Jesus didn't come to just give us a better to-do list. He came to give us his heart. He didn't only come to forgive us when we fail. He came to cut away the flesh parts of our hearts. Circumcise them. Cut off the flesh. He came to make our love for God perfect through his work and our hiddenness in him. And so through his death, our divided love is forgiven. And if you grew up in evangelical tradition, that's probably where it stopped. But it's also perfected. Through his Spirit, the law is moved from stone tablets into literally human desire and human action. You see, today we don't obey to get God's love. We obey because we already have it. Love for God that we express through obedience becomes the natural overflow of a heart that has been captured by who God is and filled with his Holy Spirit. It's not about merit. We don't earn through obedience. It matters, but not to save us. It matters because it's how we express our love. So before the command ever inspired or confronted Israel or us, it actually revealed something about God. And that's this, that God didn't have to enter covenant with Israel. That God chose to do that. He pursued relationship. He spoke promises. He was the one who rescued. He was the one who provided. He was the one who forgave. He was the one who remained faithful, even when his people repeatedly wandered around with hard hearts. And that should move us. The greatest commandment begins not with human effort, but with the divine pursuit of a God who loves you. I'm so glad that it doesn't say, if you will obey perfectly, I will love you as your God. It's, I already love you. And imagine if you would walk with me, the blessing you would know. John said it well that we love because he first loved us. Through Israel's failures, God's faithfulness never wavers. And then finally, in the provision of his son Jesus, he fulfills every demand of covenant love. We don't obey to earn, but simply because we already are. We remember, we love because we were loved first. And I love that then, because of that, wholehearted love is not a burden. Wholehearted love is actually freedom.